Heads up to everyone that we are now going live on YouTube. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kristen Donhefner, and I'm the Measure 110 Strategy and Engagement Manager with OHA, and I will be assisting with facilitating today's meeting. The Oversight and Accountability Council welcomes and encourages community input. Members of the public are invited to submit public comments or get on our interested parties email list by emailing oha.measure110@dhsoha.state.or.us. That email address and more information about the councils can be found on the Measure 110 OAC website. OAC members have asked that OHA and other staff who are present in the meeting space introduce themselves in the chat. Please share your role with the agency and if you are a subject matter expert or area of expertise. Now I'll turn it over to Melinda for some welcome and opening remarks.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 12th, 2024 Measure 110 OAC meeting. I am going to call for the agenda. Now I'm going to call for the agenda with Sydney. Oh, no, it's the OHA updates and the RFGA funding formula discussion and vote. Now I'm going to pass it back to Sydney for attendance.
Thank you, Melinda. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. I'm off camera because I am also dying from grass pollen. So appreciate seeing you all. When I call your name, please say here. Amy, do not see yet. Carlos, let us know he would be late. Caroline.
Here.
Hi, Caroline. Dharma, let us know she would not be here today. Hubert.
Here.
Hi, Hubert. Hunter.
Here.
Hi, Hunter. Jackie.
Here.
Hi, Jackie. Jonathan. Duncan. Sorry.
Here.
Hey, how's it going? Let's see. Keisha. Oh, Keisha is coming in now, so I'll come back to her. Leticia.
I'm here.
Hi, Leticia. Linda.
Here.
Hi, Linda. Melinda.
Here.
Hey, Melinda.
Hi.
Meredith.
Here.
Hi, Meredith. Morgan.
Here.
Hey, Morgan. Nicole.
I'm here.
Hi, Nicole. Onisha. Not here yet. Ron.
Ron's here.
Hi, Ron. Ryan.
Here.
Hi, Ryan. Sabrina, let us know she would be a little late. Zeb also let us know he would be a little late. Sam Byers.
I'm here.
Hi, Sam. And Annalise.
Here.
Hi, Annalise. And then I'm going to go back up to the top real quick. I know Amy's not here. Carlos. Carlos?
I'm here.
Hey, Carlos.
Hello.
Keisha.
I'm here.
Hi, Keisha. Oh, I saw you in the chat. Sorry about that. And then still don't see Onisha, Sabrina, Zeb. Okay, we're good with 17. Sorry, back to you, Melinda.
Thank you. Now we're gonna have the introduce Kristen for the updates, OHA updates.
Thanks, Melinda. We're doing updates at the top so that we have plenty of time for the discussion to come, but we only have two quick updates. Thank you to those of you who volunteered to be on the Rules Advisory Committee or the RAC next month. Those invites were sent out on Monday. So please keep an eye or make sure you check your email to see if you have that, if you had signed up to be on the RAC. We also sent out an equipment survey so that we can try to standardize and better help everyone with the various equipment issues. So please, if you haven't already responded to that, fill that out by Friday so that we can move on and hopefully get people a little bit of help and make that equipment a little more usable for everyone. Sydney, did you have any other updates?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, Kristen.
All right, thank you. So today, we have a exciting topic to bring up, and that is the 2025 request for grant applications, or RFGA funding discussion. And this is really a conversation to help OHA as we're drafting the application that will be posted sometime next month, and get started on the process that will eventually lead to you all selecting new burn grantees to start with the program in July 2025. I know that sounds like a long time from now, but we'll walk you through the calendar, and there's a lot to do in that year. So that's what we'll be talking about today, and there is a vote at the end. So today we're going to share and review the updated financial forecast that reflects how much money is projected to be available for the next grant cycle. We'll also ask you to review and approve a new funding formula for those new grants that start in July 2025. We also have a decision for you all to make about allowable costs in the next grant cycle. And we have information, and we're seeking approval for how long the next grant cycle will be. And so we'll go through these kind of one by one with votes at the end. So here's the timeline that I mentioned. We are in June, and so we are asking you today and at the next June 26th meeting to approve the final funding formula and grant period length. From there, in July, we will be publishing the grant application, or RFGA, and that application will be open for about 3 months, so July, August, and September. During that period, OHA will be sure to host I think a webinar about the application, FAQ section, and respond to questions that we received from interested grantees about the application. But really, we wanted to give plenty of time for folks to respond. So when that period closes in September, OHA staff and I think some OAC volunteers will begin scoring all of these applications. If folks remember from last time, we received a few hundred, and I think we're anticipating similar levels of interest. So getting through that will take time. We're hoping to modify the scoring process so that it's a little more streamlined, but it still will require going through pages of applications and scoring those. From there, we will bring all of those scored applications back to this council in November and December for voting on funding proposals and voting on any appeals. Because if you'll remember, House Bill 2513 mandated that we create an appeals process for applicants that were rejected. And so we'll probably have to schedule some extra special meetings in November and December to get through all of those. But that means in the new year, we can start sending out letters of intent and making any final negotiations and working on getting those grant agreements out so that there isn't any gap between when the current grant cycle ends on June 30th, 2025, and the new grant period begins on July 1st, 2025. We also have the kind of added pressure of wanting to get letters of intent out before February when the legislature convenes for their long session. So moving into what funding is available. The Measure 110 funding comes from the Drug Treatment and Recovery Services Fund, or DTSRF. And this revenue is projected periodically by the state economist. And this graph shows how the revenue forecast has declined over time since the beginning of the grant program in June of 2022 through the most recent forecast, which was released a few weeks ago, June 2024. You can see this trend line took a pretty big dip and kind of came up a little bit, but is still tapering off. So the big picture, or the big takeaway from that is there is less money, there will be less money available for the future grant cycle than there is for the current grant cycle. Excuse me, and broken down, what that means is as of this month, so the latest numbers that are available, the fund is projected to have approximately $211.4 million for the 2025 through 2027 biennium, and a little bit more, $276.3 million for the 2027 through 2029 biennium. Although the state economist does mention that the estimates for the further out you get are harder and harder to accurately predict. So there is a big kind of caveat with that 27, 29 number. If we assume that we will continue to hold our $15 million admin budget steady each biennium, that means from 2025 through 2027, there would be $196.4 million available. And from 2027 through 2029, there would be $261.3 million available. So if we move forward with the 4-year grant cycle, which we will discuss later, there would be $457.7 million available for those 4 years. As a reminder that this revenue all comes from cannabis taxes. So it's not at all tied to the performance of Measure 110 or our current grantees. And some of the key factors that drive, that have driven the decrease in revenue, according to the state economist, is a pretty steady user base, but very low prices. So simply, we're not collecting as much tax revenue from cannabis users over time. Excuse me. So with that, overall, and we'll break down each of these recommendations one by one, we are recommending that the council adopt a county-based funding formula with a tribal set-aside, so very similar to what we currently have. We also are recommending to disallow capital expenses such as purchasing buildings, construction, renovations, or vehicles, and we will get into an explanation of why we're recommending that in a little bit later in this presentation. And we're also recommending a 4-year grant period to span 2 biennia. So the grants would start July 1, 2025 and end June 30th, 2020. And we'll break down each of these recommendations for you to vote on separately throughout this presentation. So first of all, we're recommending a county-based funding formula. And that is similar to what we have now. Each county has a set allocation that grantees have to stay under. The current funding formula is based on 3 factors. There is a base amount that reflects the population size of each county. There's also a set of variables that reflect the needs of the community. And these variables are weighted based on input from the council, based on what you all told us was important and in alignment with your values. So today we are seeking your approval to amend the current county formula to include some additional variables. We're also asking that in the event that the collective ask is less than a county allocation, we keep those extra funds in reserve due to the volatile nature of the revenue stream. I think we can all kind of remember back to 2 summers ago when we were negotiating these. We had some counties where the asks far exceeded what was allocated to that county, and people had to make pretty big cuts. But we had a few counties where the ask was significantly under that county allocation. And in that instance, the council directed us to give additional funds away. But I think that led to some conflict with us having to perhaps fund organizations that the council didn't really want to fund fully. It did lead to delays in getting the funding out. So this would kind of avoid those 2 situations. So to break down our new proposed funding formula, we would continue to use the same population-based rate, but we would add new variables that are based on the public health modernization factors that OHA uses, plus some additional factors such as houselessness rate and drug overdose rate that are from the current funding formula. We could weight these factors and adjust these weights based on the council's preference. We think that this new formula could better reflect county by county needs and help kind of smooth some of those big differences where we had some counties not receiving a whole lot of money and some counties receiving almost too much. If this concept is approved, OHA would finalize the county by county numbers to present to you all at the next meeting on June 26th. That way you all could see a side-by-side comparison of your current formula and what this new formula would look like. And you could vote on one of those 2 at that time. I just want to caveat that all of these county by county numbers in both scenarios will continue to be projections because they're based on what we have, information we have available now. And we know that the financial forecast will continue to shift a little bit. And we have yet to determine the final tribal set aside amount. So these will be still projections, but they will be hopefully give you a sense of scale. So the current county funding distribution formula gives each county a base amount that is derived from the population, and we're not proposing to change this. But here you can see that at a minimum, the base amount is $500,000. At the maximum, it's 2.5 million. And it kind of is adjusted in between there in $500,000 increments based on county size. We're not proposing to change this. The current funding formula includes the houselessness count, the Medicaid population, arrest numbers, and drug overdose deaths. And the council voted to weight the houselessness count and the Medicaid population slightly higher than the arrest numbers or drug overdose death numbers. So this is what currently goes into it. We're proposing to add some new variables, again, that are based on the public health modernization funding formula. So these are all numbers that we know and that we have broken down county by county, but they would account for the burden of disease, the health status. Instead of Medicaid rate, it would be the population below 150% of the federal poverty line. A rural factor, the high school graduation rate of a county, the English proficiency rate of a county, and the houselessness rate and the drug overdose rate. So the first 6 are all public health modernization metrics. The second 2 are metrics that are pulled from our current formula, and they are weighted a little bit heavier. knowing that these were important to the council a couple years ago. All of these variables could be changed or taken away or increased depending on your conversation today and what you would like to see. I think we are proposing dropping the arrest numbers from this calculation simply because there really haven't been many in the last 4 years. So there haven't, that isn't necessarily a good maybe metric of what is happening at the county level just because of decriminalization. We're also recommending that the council vote to disallow capital expenses such as buildings, construction, renovations, or vehicles. This is due for a few reasons. First of all, there is a reduction in the overall availability of funds. In 2021, there were $265 million available. And in 2025, there's only projected to be $196.4 million available. So instead, we're recommending that the council redirect funds to primarily serve to pay for services, personnel costs. What we've found is that real property doesn't really provide a strong return or an immediate return on investment. While there is still a need for housing or for detox or for residential beds, what we've found is that for projects that were funded in 2022, some of them won't be off the ground or up and running until late 2025. And so we're not seeing those investments provide a return very quickly, even within a 3-year grant cycle. We also, I think, can recognize that the legislature in their most recent session has devoted some additional grant dollars to fund real property investment. So Measure 110 isn't the only revenue stream that's doing this at this time. We've also found that vehicles are very difficult to administer, to track, and to secure. While we know that, especially in rural counties, transportation can be an issue, what we found is some grantees either not reporting their vehicle purchases to us, or say they were approved for 1 vehicle, suddenly they bought 3. And so tracking all of those pieces is a pretty high burden on OHA. But I think this is a decision point for the council to make, so you all can think about it. We also think that by not having large capital expenditures or proposals, this might reduce the need for negotiations to fit awards within the county allocation. What we found in 2022 was in a county that had, say, $10 million available, if someone wanted to build an $8 million center, that ate up a significant amount of that county's allocation and led to us having to negotiate down those awards in order to fit all of the services within that allocation. And that did lead to some delays in getting funding out. So we think that this would reduce some of those needs for negotiating and kind of expedite the process of getting funding out quicker. We're also recommending a 4-year grant length for grants to start in July 1, 2025 and end June 30th, 2029. The current grant cycle is 3 years. We found that 18 months, originally it was 18 months, and we found that that really wasn't enough time to get programs launched and start effectively serving clients. So it was extended to 3 years, but that did mean we had to renegotiate all of our grant agreements. And we want to avoid ending our grant cycle in a mid-biennium. So that would be another 3-year cycle, would suddenly put us kind of in this weird mid-biennium spot. So that's why we're recommending an even 4-year cycle. Because the revenue stream is pretty volatile, we're also recommending that awards are conditional and subject to yearly revisions based on the availability of funds. We would require future grantees to submit updated yearly budgets to reflect their actual spending and any changes to available revenue. What we found is between people applying in 2021, signing their grant agreements in 2022, and now administering these grants in 2024, there's quite a bit of natural shift that just happens. And so by kind of baking in yearly attestations or revisions, this would help us keep our grantees kind of on track spending, and make sure we can, I think, catch some issues earlier. And the details on this is still yet to be worked out, but that's all to say that I know a 4-year grant length sounds like a long time, but I think there could be points built into that each year to ensure that folks are staying on track. So we have some draft motions, but I think those, we can get to those. I will just pause there because I know we gave everyone a lot of information and there are a lot of decision points, but the 3 big ones are directing, if you approve us to move forward with a new formula with new variables, we can do that and bring that back to you all in 2 weeks for a final approval. We're asking you to recommend or not recommend funding capital, and we're asking you about grant cycle. So those are the 3 kind of decisions, and we can change these motions on the fly based on your discussion that you've had today. So it looks like Ron, I see your hand is up, and then Caroline.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very detailed and precise in the information. And there's definitely a lot to consider and it raises a lot of questions, but I think it's definitely heading in the right direction in terms of the spirit and intent and purpose of it. My first question really is about the determining the county funding or the county level funding, which is, has there been, is there currently, or has anyone taken the time to take the amount that we would be granting, let's say if it's a 2-year, 4-year, and then apply that to the new formula to see what each county would look like?
We're working on that now, but it wasn't done in time for this meeting. So we would bring that, what we're proposing is to bring that back to you all on the 26th so you can kind of see a side by side. Here's what your original formula would look like, and here's what this new formula would look like so that you can see kind of those 2 comparisons.
Okay.
But we think it will have kind of a little bit of a smoothing effect in terms of not having maybe such big disparities between each county.
And one thing I another question I had was about existing state funding going to counties for SUD and mental health and behavioral health. It'd be interesting to see kind of what's currently going to counties just to get a sense. And that would be a number that I think would be worth considering in terms of if we're going to expand to kind of these public health variables, like what is the existing level of state funding going to counties for behavioral health or mental health or public health generally. I would be interested in that. And I do have a number of questions, but I'm not going to dominate. I see there's some other hands, but one question, I'll just ask one more question, which is about the RFGA and the evaluation process, which is related to kind of form and process. So that's the area where we really got hung up in 2021, which was the 600 elements that had to be scored in the evaluation rubric that we used. That once the council started working on that, of course, everyone knows that everyone went to work on these rubrics. We turned in our rubrics, and then OHA said, well, this is not complete enough. And then the OHA took over at some point, brought in like 140 people to complete the rubrics, and then came back to the council with recommendations from OHA staff on all of the proposals. And so I just kind of want to hear what's going to be different.
Sure. So under House Bill 2513, the legislature shifted the RFGA writing and scoring back to OHA. So we are in the process of drafting an RFGA that I think is a little bit more succinct, doesn't ask me quite so many questions, but has elements that can be easily scored. We're also drafting a kind of accompanying rubric up front, so that those two pieces are being developed simultaneously and they kind of complement each other. I believe the statute, House Bill 2513, states that at least 2 council members are involved in the scoring process. So we will be asking for at least 2 of you to volunteer to act as reviewers and scorers. Of course, that's a minimum, that's not a maximum. So we'll take, I think, all the help we can get, but we will be also supplementing anyone from this group that volunteers with staff that have already been identified from within the behavioral health unit. So we've already kind of identified our reviewers, and we'll be working this summer to train them on the application and the rubric, so that when
Thank you. That was very helpful, because that was one of what I heard you say was OAC volunteers would be conducting the scoring process. So this was very helpful to hear you flesh that out a little more. Thanks.
Of course, yeah.
Feel free to complete your answer.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Can you put up the PowerPoint backup?
Yeah.
Because I trying to remember what my question was, but if we could go back to the county breakdown, the formula you're using according to the population size, and keep going backwards. That one. So I understand this, but this was this based on an 18-month, and now we're going to go to a 2-year. So if we adjust this, because your last slide or second to last slide said that you guys are going to go away from the 18-month and you're going to go to a 2-year, which makes it 4 years. So is this for 4 years, or is this for 2 years, or this is 18 months and you're going to have to adjust it for 2 years, or is this for 4 years?
That's a good point of clarification. This was for 18 months, so we would have to scale it up to reflect for 4 years or 2 years, depending on what guidance the council gives today. I didn't do that math because kind of not knowing if the council would vote on 2 years or 4 years, but whatever you vote on, we will reflect this so it's proportional to that length of time and factor it into the final county by county numbers that we can present in 2 weeks.
Because it's going to be a big significant difference then, because the tribal set aside was based on a fixed formula that cannot go down, could only go up if the revenue goes up, but that was based on 18 months. So, I mean, I just want to make sure that we have to then do an 18-month budget, and now we're going to do a 2-year budget. So we're not going to know what that base amount is anymore, since we're going to go to a 2-year versus a 18-month. I just want to make sure that, when I report to the tribes, I know what I'm telling them, because last time we just pretty well got the same amount because the revenue did not go up. And so we knew what our 18-month budget was, but now it's going to be a 2-year. Anyway, I'm assuming, I guess I'm not ready to vote until we get all the adjustments done. And I really want to also go back to the one in terms of the change of the formula, because I know the tribes are going to have a base, but I'm concerned about the counties now in terms of I'm not sure, the new proposed funding, I'm not sure, I guess, if I could digest this fast enough to make a really good recommendation. And go to the next one, because you had it broken down. I think the next slide where you broke it down. Okay, the next one. That this is going to be new county variables. See, I mean, I'm having, I guess, trouble adjusting or digesting that by, I don't think I'm capable of making a good vote at this point. And I don't know how fast we need a vote in order to move forward.
So we're asking you just to tell us to move forward with coming up with this is one option and the same kind of formula as an option and bring those back to you. So that's kind of what we're asking you to vote on today. This is the final formula. You don't get to see it again. You never get a county by county breakdown. We just want to kind of see if this is conceptually what the direction the council wants us to head in, and then we'll come back to you in 2 weeks with actual numbers so you can see what this looks like, if that makes sense.
I guess what I'm saying, in fact, he did not request this, someone else requested it. So who requested us to maybe use this as a new variable? I mean, because we didn't. It didn't even come up in my, being on these meetings. I don't think I would have ever come up with this. So someone came up with this for a purpose. And I guess I just need to understand what that purpose was for us to go away from just a population base and giving the counties according to population. And now we're adding other variables, which might change the amount that some counties get if they have a higher,
Yeah, so we proposed both, we shared how the formula currently works with OHA leadership. And they asked me to ask you all to look at adding in these variables and considering adding in these variables because our leadership wants to see a little bit more, I think, inputs go into the funding formula. But at the end of the day, this is your decision. And this is just a consideration. So if this doesn't feel good to you all, and this isn't the direction you want to go, you can tell me to go take a hike and I will come back and come back with what does feel good to you all, because this is your funding formula.
I guess the reason why I'm asking this is because of the fact that unless we use this as a comparable in terms of we put this as part of the formula, then our RFP needs to address these areas. And are we willing now to address these areas because we're using this? So are these contributors to, I could say it is that this is kind of like risk factors that add to maybe substance use disorder. But if we're going to use this, then I would then think it should be part of the proposal to hopefully target these areas, because the intent then is for these, high school graduation, then we want to increase that rate because we believe it contributes to substance use disorder, or to decrease homeless rates. So I'm just trying to, I'm having trouble, I guess, connecting the dots right now because I'm just am. But I don't know, we could hear from the others to see what other folks are thinking.
Yeah, no, that's a valid points. I don't think we would be having our grantees look for factors to address those changes. So we wouldn't be expecting people to comment on if they're doing anything about high school graduation or English proficiency, but rather, I think the goal is that individuals with some of the greatest health disparities receive these kinds of services. And that's kind of the goal of the public health modernization funding formula. And so I think that's just a known factor of sorts here at OHA and kind of what people gravitate to. But again, this is your funding, your formula, your decisions. And so we want to make sure that you all are comfortable with wherever we land. And I'm sorry, I don't know who was first. Maybe Sabrina?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions and I'll ask one at a time if that's okay, Kristen.
That would be
So
great.
the population, just so I understand it, and I can wrap my mind around it, the population slide was one option and the new modernization slide was a second option. Is that part correct?
So the population would be a base, and
Yeah.
then the factors would build on top of that. Currently, population is a base and there are factors that build on top of it. We're just proposing to change those factors. But population was a base in the current funding cycle, and we're recommending it continue to be a base, just to recognize that some counties are big, some counties are small. You kind of have to account a little bit for that size, but that's just the base. That's not what the whole thing is based off of.
So I'm in favor of moving forward if we don't have to make a decision which one we're going to use today, just to get to the next step of deciding which. So if I'm hearing you correctly, we need a vote or some kind of decision to move forward just to compare the numbers in 2 weeks, but we don't have to decide which model we're using today. We just need to give you permission to move forward to crunch those numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think permission to move forward and feedback, because this is helpful feedback. What is important. If, you all don't want to include one of those variables, we can exclude it. So it's just permission to move forward and your feedback.
So the base will be just the base, but then you add those variables on top of it, and that can fluctuate the amount each county can get depending on those variables included on top of the base.
Correct.
Okay, and yeah, like I said, I'm in favor of seeing the numbers just to see what it looks like, especially if we don't have to make a decision of which one we're going to use today.
Thanks, Sabrina. I know Melinda or Annalise, one of you is next. I'm sorry, I couldn't see hand order fast enough.
Go ahead, Melinda.
Okay, so I just have a question. Could you turn it back to that slide where it had the percentages on it? Okay. So hold on a second. So I was trying to figure out the burden of disease and health status. What's the difference between those? And then I went down here and it shows you. And these are based off the Census Bureau's estimates from 2010.
So the the Census Bureau estimates from 2010 is used to estimate the rural factor of a county. The burden of disease would come from Oregon death certificate data from 2014 to 2018 and look at the leading causes of potential life loss before age 75. So it really looks at premature death.
So why are they going back to 2014 instead of starting at like 2020?
I don't think we have. I think that's the most recently available data. There's always just a lag in the data, so I can double check, but this is, I believe, what is most recently available.
So how accurate can these numbers be if we don't have the correct up-to-date census?
I think they're always going to be a little bit of a lag, no matter kind of what factors you're looking at, particularly with some of these big ones. But that is something for you all to consider if you want to use these or not.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
You can just leave this slide up, I think. So I have a couple comments. I just want to emphasize Carolyn's comment and just knowing the questions I'm going to be asked about this. I think having a better understanding of why we're using each of these and what the through line is to this particular program. I'm not objecting to any of them, but I mean, you will be held to account if you use these. Like, this implies that you are expecting to influence all of these numbers through this program. So I think understanding that through line I have a suggestion and a question. So one suggestion on drug overdose rate is to consider changing that to drug overdose data. And the reason I suggest that is because of kind of this stale data and what we see happening in our smaller counties. Like you're always going to see the top handful of counties in Oregon as those with the highest overdose rate. But when it gets to our more rural, because the numbers are so small, it just fluctuates from year to year. So using overdose rate, overdose number of deaths and hospitalizations over a period of years. And that I think is what's going to come out of a couple other rulemakings that are happening right now, changing it to overdose data instead of rate. So that's one suggestion. My question though is, how are you defining rural? Because I found recently we don't have a consistent definition of rural. So it would be good to better understand that as well.
Yeah, and I would have to get back to you based on kind of doing a deeper dive on the public health rate and kind of their explanation. This is just lifted from that, but we can definitely talk to our public health director and get that information back to you. And share with the whole council next week or in 2 weeks. Jackie.
Hey, thank you. I have some similar questions. I guess I'm trying to understand the motivation for these, selecting these variables. I'm guessing it really has to do with just outcomes and trying to show that the money is well invested and that it's having good outcomes in the areas. Is that correct?
I don't necessarily know if it's so much tied to outcomes. I think that these are all kind of overall markers of population health. And so looking at, as we look at funding distribution, the goal is to target resources towards places that really need them. So by looking at different variables, we can start to get a more complex, detailed picture of where those areas of high need are and direct funding resources to them. So this just adds kind of additional data points to help direct those resources.
I guess the other question similar to what's been asked is how can we use pre-pandemic data to really end this, broader just crisis that's been going on with within all of our communities, that we wouldn't be looking at anything current. We'd be looking at all old data, 2014, 2018. It's all before the real crisis began. I mean, we've been in crisis for a long time. I appreciate that. Well, I don't appreciate it, but I understand that. But the reality is that we're not going to be really comparing to know what's going on right now if we can't get some more current data. That's kind of what I'm thinking. But
I think that's a super valid criticism. And again, if you all feel that the data lag is too great, and to your point, Jackie, it wouldn't truly reflect kind of what has happened pre and post 2020, we can absolutely, look at excluding it or trying to find alternate factors.
I think it would be interesting to see the impacts on the counties, what we see now, and what counties would be ranked, higher or lower, depending upon, the parameters that you're looking at. I just think it has to be more current. But I'm not saying that we would use it, but just to be able to examine it and determine whether we wanted to fund by that or not. I don't know what it'll show us. So I'm always wanting to learn.
Yeah, thank you. Of course. Sam and then Morgan.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I think, just for context, the conversation with our leadership was really related to making sure that as we were looking at a scoring tool, that we were building one that really would the best of our ability, prioritize populations that experience health disparities from a system that has not taken care of them for years. And so, you know, we really talked a lot about the values of the council and the spirit of 110 originally. And so the conversation came out of that, and that public health modernization had moved towards some of these variables to try to really hone in on that and be able to serve those populations more fully, more equitably. So it again, I know we're all just kind of wondering questions. I think for Kristen and I were curious what the numbers too would look like if we saw them crunched out with these variables. We really don't have a sense of whether or not that would get the scoring in a way that would uphold your values and really purpose. And so the question today was really, you know, would you want to see that? Or are you like, no, we don't want to see it, which is also an option as well. But we don't really know what those numbers would look like. We wanted to come to you first to see if that would be something you'd want to compare to what we have currently as our scoring weights.
It'd be interesting to see or hear what this group would think the areas they would want to look at to kind of determine that. Are those the ones that people think are the most important to look at, or are there other ones? And then, of course, how do you get the data? So.
And then also, you can also play with how it's weighted, right? Even if you were like, yeah, I want to see those variables, you could be like, I'd rather see it with like overdose rates at a higher weight than the others. So I think, you know, just trying not to make it too complicated, but to make sure that we give you all the options so that those communities that you're wanting to serve are really getting the maximum dollars and services.
Thanks, Sam. Morgan and then Keisha.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So from a public health perspective, these metrics look pretty good. I mean, they're pretty familiar other than the limited English proficiency. I've seen these in hundreds of papers evaluating public health needs. The data question is always just going to be a perennial issue. I mean, I think the CDC finally just certified the entire year for 2022 with overdose data. And then they have like the provisional one for 2023. So sometimes you just can't get around that, but trends are super important also. Instead of just looking at single years, trends in a particular community. But then to Annalisa's point on overdose data, we would need to define that a little bit. But something that I would like to see is like what proportion of overdose deaths the decedent is also testing positive for methamphetamine to look at polysubstance use, which we know is the complicating factor for disease in higher need. And so if we change the rate to a broader overdose data package, something like that, something that also would look at methamphetamine, there isn't the same overdose with methamphetamine, we would need some sort of proxy data point. But I also think that would be really important when determining need.
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit, but what I heard was asking us to see if we can see if there's any data out there on overdose data involving polysubstance use and methamphetamines, right? Is that right? And I can see if we have that available. I'm not sure if we do.
We need a proxy data point for how much a particular community is afflicted by A, polysubstance use, and B, methamphetamine alone. So looking at drug overdose only is going to mask other substances of concern.
Got it. I can talk to some folks here and see if we have any such kind of established proxy.
I mean, you definitely have because I just read a report on this, maybe it was from Multnomah County, but it was polysubstance. So if someone dies of a fentanyl overdose, do they also test positive for methamphetamine? Or in what proportion of people dying of fentanyl are also testing positive for methamphetamine?
Yeah, I think we do have some more detailed overdose rates that do include methamphetamine and um, yeah. Thank you. Look at those. Keisha.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, who's controlling the data that we're looking at? Because if we're talking about those most impacted by the war on drugs, that's a small percentage of the big population, but a big percentage of overdose rates and other things, other social determinants of health. So I'm just wondering, like, how are we looking at this data? Are we looking at the overall population to break down, or are we looking at those most impacted by the war on drugs? Like, depending on who's controlling the data and how they are disseminating it, it can be an unintended consequence for the Black and Brown and Indigenous communities.
Yeah, Keisha, I think that's an important point. And I think we have I have to look at how broken down our data is. I want to say that our general overdose death data is just statewide and it's pretty general. But another variable I think we could add or look at adding is either impact on communities of color. I don't know if that's available kind of in the way I'm thinking of it, or just populations in general. So looking at kind of overdose disparity rates within communities of color. I think that's available, if that would be of interest.
So are you guys gonna come back before you decide on the um the different data points that you're gonna, allocate funding for before you do it, or you just gonna go ahead and take suggestions and move on the way it is?
I think we're taking suggestions here, and we'll come up with a proposed formula based on that for everyone here to look at, and either say, nope, that's wrong, go back and do it again, or, yes, this is the direction we want. But either way, for this group's final approval, this is kind of an intermediate step to get feedback to see if these variables are important or meaningful, or if they're not. I think some of the things I heard were looking at data instead of rates, more information about how we define rural, seeing if we have any more current data. And then Keisha, I think, Morgan's point about polysubstance use and methamphetamine use, and then kind of a overdose disparity rate. So kind of looking at those 5 factors, or tweaking what we're looking at to include and define those 5 factors. And I'm hearing that kind of in addition to what we've proposed, or maybe tweaking some of what we've proposed. But if there's anything that is up there that this group is like, nope, absolutely not important, just exclude it, we can take that too. Caroline.
Has anyone had a conversation with the counties, maybe the community mental health providers, to see if they were satisfied with the formula that we came up last time with the breakdown within the counties? Because I do know that some of the smaller counties could not use all those dollars. And then we kind of, maybe this is not the correct word, but I can't think of another word. We kind of forced them to use more money when they submitted their plans. You know, they obviously submitted what they thought they needed. We did have a couple of smaller counties who submitted a higher need, but have we had a conversation? I mean, if they're just satisfied with the population base? I mean, has anyone talked with I don't know. I mean, things are not the same when I was working for the state, when I knew we had county contacts that we could talk with. And I don't know what exists now. I'm making some assumption that we still have, a person that oversees the county when they're a community mental health provider. I mean, have they? If they were satisfied with the population base, I guess what I'm saying is the fact that it's hard for me to compare this whole state. We say that certain populations need more money. We say maybe certain counties need more money, but if we really think about it, they all need money. I don't care what size they are. There's addiction, and all of us are impacted by addiction. I don't know one family that's not impacted by addiction. And so I feel comfortable with the breakup of the county getting a base amount and let them submit their application based on that. I'm not sure why we're going through all these other extra variables to create, it's going to be a hardship on us to kind of come up with all that formula when we just had the base dollars to give the counties. So I'm not really sure why we're doing all this when I think every county has a need. And I'm sure Dave already let you guys know that they all need money and we're not giving them enough money. Some people are saying we're not giving them enough money. But some of the rural counties have too much money. So I'm not really sure why we're adding all these variables. And that's just my own personal opinion. I don't need an answer, but.
No, you're good. You're good. I think that's helpful feedback. I have heard from many of our rural counties that actually don't think that the floor was enough. The $750,000 floor was enough for their county. I think that's kind of one of the most consistent pieces of feedback that we've gotten. Is that, but I think looking at strictly just population based, maybe that kind of misses some of these other important things that other folks have brought up around polysubstance use and overdose rate and disparities. So I think adding those variables in just kind of further drills down some of those factors that aren't just based on population size alone. But Sam, I saw your hand up, so I don't know if you want further thoughts to share.
Yeah, I was also just going to add some of the conversation of this really came out of some of the statewide listening sessions that the executive team has been having around the state. And that's really in part how it also came up around when we put the funding formula forward. I think that, whether or not a county is able to serve populations that they typically serve versus like reaching out into maybe smaller communities that are in dominant culture areas could cost more money. And I think it's just figuring out how do you make sure that those areas have funds so that those communities are equally served. So I think it was a combination of listening sessions from the providers, talking to Sejal and the executive team directly, and then also just trying to ensure that no matter where you live in the state, if you're a part of a population that has had significant health disparities, that funding will be allotted so that you actually have an equitable chance to receive services. And sometimes in our more rural, remote areas, that's harder for those communities. So.
I know folks can definitely feel free to continue to chime in about the kind of variables and weights. Curious, though, I don't want to lose kind of the other decision points that are also kind of in front of us today. If people have feelings on excluding capital purchases in the next grant cycle or continuing to include them. Ron.
Yeah, my thought or my question on that would be, so one of the areas that folks seem to express a lot of need for, it wasn't so much to purchase property, but it was in terms of leases and being able to rent space and be able to obtain space. And I'm just wondering how that would be impacted by this.
So I don't think that would be. We define capital as things that the council secures. So that is really only purchasing property, renovating property, construction, or vehicles. That isn't office rent or leasing a house or anything that is kind of necessary for folks to do business.
So leases would be excluded.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Thanks.
Duncan.
Hi, I'm thinking about the cars thing. It is something I see a lot with agencies is a lot of, specifically within peers. I'm a peer manager, but even outside of where I work, I see a lot of peers having to use their own car, driving a lot of people. So I do like see an area where cars and vehicles should be, well, would be more, a lot more help, especially with retention of peers and their vehicles.
Thanks, Duncan. That's helpful feedback. And that's something that, again, we can amend that motion to exclude one and not the other. All both. This is all your decisions. Melinda.
So yeah, I agree with like what Duncan was saying. Vehicles are needed. We're out here in the Portland area, the metropolitan area, and we need them. So I can only imagine what the rural areas would need. Being smaller and not having access to TriMet transportation and only having taxi services.
Thanks, Melinda. Annalise.
I wonder if, and this, Duncan and Melinda, what you said made me think of this. I wonder if it's worth the group thinking about, we've been kind of talking about these really high level over decades, public health modernization data. If we're thinking about where the best investment is right now and considering deflection, like, I know we haven't really talked much about this, but like everything has changed since you guys did that last round of funding. And so thinking about, like, for instance, vehicles, like in terms of like setting up more deflection programs to make sure that you can pick someone up so they don't go to jail. Like, so just maybe thinking about that lens a little bit, if you want to adjust things, just throwing that out there.
Thanks, Annalise. Sabrina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about as far as the vehicles, like just for an example, in my county, we recently went from running a bus 6 days a week, many hours a day, to 5 days a week, and from only 8 to 5. So it just causes this big old barrier to access services. And if we're not, I could see where we wouldn't allow the capital expense for transportation, but I could see where it'd also be a great benefit because a lot of the peer supports are having to use their own vehicles, putting wear and tear on them, and then not having the funding or the money to fix them. And so then they're without a job. And then also, and if we're not going to do capital expenses and we're going to expect the organization to come up with vehicles or peer supports and continue to do that too, really make sure, I don't know how we can ensure this, but I think something some organizations overlook is the mileage for transports. They're like, we can't provide that. There's not enough funds in the where with the money to be able to provide transports all the time. So then we're kind of stuck at square or at back to the beginning where we're not able to provide that transport or help. And I see that across rural communities. So thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina. And mileage, I would say, would continue to be kind of an allowable cost. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that people are open maybe to continuing to fund the purchase of vehicles.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
This is Hubert.
Hi, Hubert.
How y'all doing? Is it possible that we could increase our tax revenue that we get from the marijuana tax to increase more funds so we won't have this problem with less funds?
I don't think there really is many options there. You know, I think the taxes collected are what they are, and we get, I want to say 70% of the revenue, and that is baked into statute. So we can't do anything without the legislature helping us out.
But the legislature can be talked to, and they can put it to the voter, to the table, if we need to increase funding to increase our revenue. It's possible, right?
I think to a certain degree, but at the same time, I think there, you know, are a limited number of cannabis users who are purchasing these products, and the tax rate kind of is a portion of the sale, and marijuana prices are really low right now. So I think that at a certain point, it's hard to raise taxes. It would require the legislature, I think, raising taxes on these products, or pretty significantly changing how they tax cannabis to increase revenue.
And Hubert, I just wanted to chime in and say, just in terms of the legislature, there have been multiple attempts by folks in the legislature to take money away from Measure 110 and redirect. Right. And so the idea of like saying, give us more is probably not, you know, politically feasible when that environment exists.
Interesting. All right.
I have that same question I had the other day about when they declassify marijuana, how will it be taxed?
Are you talking about federal scheduling?
Yeah, that.
Well, I'll let somebody else talk about that.
Yeah, so that won't change. Rescheduling marijuana won't change its tax structure at all. It would continue to be illegal at the federal level, taxed at the state level, but nothing would really change in terms of its tax status.
Interesting.
Linda, I see your hand is up.
Thanks. Looking at some of the preliminary data from the Measure 110 symposium, and some of you may have been to that, but I think one of the biggest barriers for getting services out to people and getting funding out was workforce barriers. So I do like the idea of having some guidelines around really trying to encourage getting funding into the workforce to retain people and hire people, which is not to say that I don't agree that, you know, some of these other capital expenditures may be important, but I wonder if there's a way we could help prioritize workforce.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think by you know, not funding buildings, there would be a lot more funding available for staff training, for recruitment, for retention, for personnel, for kind of addressing some of those workforce needs. Jackie.
Oh, hi. I wonder if I could go back to the earlier part of the conversation. I'm not aware of how many of the programs that were funded were really startup programs, and whether they're at a place now where they could continue if they don't have help leases. Because I know part of this was to develop some grassroots efforts and to really empower communities to make a difference. And so I'm just wondering if that they're okay to do that now. I mean, I know that's a good goal. I'm not questioning. I just don't know if we know when. That would be good.
Yeah, I think that's just really going to depend on the organization. And since there are, I think, about 160 of them funded across 200 some grant agreements, it's really just going to depend on case by case basis of where an organization started, where they are now. And I think there's been kind of an overwhelming response to these services. I think I know that some providers said, here's our vision, here's what we think we can do. And then we're completely blown away by how many people really wanted and needed those services in their communities. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for even organizations that are funded currently to continue to grow, just to meet the need that's out there. What I'm kind of hearing from this conversation is folks are generally comfortable not allowing building purchases, but would like to allow vehicle purchases. It's kind of the feeling I'm getting, so we can make that a change to the motion when it comes time. And that's that second bullet there. Thanks, Carly. Do folks have feelings on a 2-year versus a 4-year grant cycle? I think that's kind of the final decision point. Yeah, Sabrina.
I am in favor of the 4-year cycle.
Thanks. Duncan.
I'm also in favor of the 4-year cycle. I've talked to several places throughout the state that are purely ran off of Measure 110, and they're all like worrying about, like sustainability. So the comfort from a 4-year plan will let them focus on a plan moving forward after that, just in case.
It's like Meredith said she was also in favor in the chat. Ron.
Yeah, I think, I agree 100% that, in terms of longevity, sustainability, predictability, being for organizations to be able to look into the future and not be worried about where things stand in terms of continuation of funding and feel the pressure of that every 18 months. I think that it's a great move to extend it, and it probably goes a long way towards kind of securing the funding.
Thanks, Ron. Caroline.
So are we making a motion per bullet and not the whole thing? Is that what we're gonna do now?
If there's no more conversation, otherwise we can keep discussing the any of these things. We kind of broke these down into 3 different decisions, so 3 different bullet points, also so we could edit them a little easier based on the outcome of this conversation. So if folks want to make a motion, otherwise we can continue this discussion, noting that, that first point is really just directing OHA to come back in 2 weeks with some additional information, not kind of finalizing a form. Ron.
Yeah, I want to make a motion on the third point. I move to agree to a 4-year grant cycle starting July 1, 2025 and ending June 30th, 2029 for the 2025 RFGA process.
And I second that. And this is Sabrina.
We have go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
you go ahead, Melinda.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, Sydney, I guess, does anyone want to make a second motion, or should we just call the vote on that one and then return to these? Let's
we have
vote
a
on this
second?
one. Vote on this one, and then we can move to the other two. That works.
Did we get a second?
Sabrina second.
I'll second. No.
Yeah, Meredith.
Okay, we have
A double
all in
second.
favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Well, Sydney
Hey,
will
raise
Sydney
your
will Sydney will call the vote. We can bring
Okay.
the slide down, and Sydney will call the vote. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a roll call.
Melinda's coming for my job, you guys. I'm just kidding.
I am.
All right, the motion to agree to a 4-year grant cycle, that was seconded. And did Amy join us? All right, Carlos.
Yes.
Caroline?
Yes.
All right, Hubert.
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Jackie?
Yes.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Keisha?
Yes.
Leticia? Come back to Leticia. Linda?
Yes.
Melinda?
Yes.
Meredith?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, my screen just swapped on me. Yes, for Meredith. Thank you. Morgan? Come back there. Nicole?
Yes.
Thank you. Onisha? All right, I see Leticia in the chat, so I'll mark that. Onisha? All right,
So
Ron?
the Keisha name is Onisha.
Right, is she is she voting? Okay, okay. I see Onisha voted in the chat. Maybe I'll change that name here in a minute so it reflects as Onisha. Ron?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Sabrina?
Yes.
And Zeb?
Yes.
Thank you. And just, sorry, my full screen, I can't see the participants at this moment. I'm just gonna go back through Amy. And Morgan. Okay, well, that passes with 17, so we're good.
Great. Thank you, Sydney.
Yeah.
We have these two other motions, if people want to make them or continue conversation.
All right, I see that the vehicles has been removed from the second bullet. And so I would like to make the motion. I move to not fund the purchase of real property or renovation of real property in the 2025 request for grant applications.
I second that. This is Sabrina.
All right, motion to not fund purchase of real property or renovations. That was seconded. Carlos.
Yes.
Thank you. Caroline.
No.
Okay, Hubert,
Yes.
Hunter,
I'm gonna abstain.
Jackie,
No.
Jonathan,
Um, sorry. Uh, no.
Isha,
No.
Leticia,
No.
Linda,
Yes.
Melinda,
Yes.
Meredith,
Yes.
still no Morgan, Nicole,
Yes.
Onisha. Onisha voted no in the chat. Ron,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
Sabrina,
Yes.
and Zeb.
Yes.
All right, that passes with 10 yes, 6 no, and 1 abstention.
Thanks, Sydney. Would folks like to have any more conversation about kind of what we're proposing to do, which is take our current funding, your all's current funding formula, kind of plug in numbers for 4 years, and also take this newer approach, plug in numbers for 4 years and compare those in 2 weeks and have you vote on that approach in 2 weeks. That's what we're asking for today.
Will that show will we know the tribal set aside based on those numbers?
So these numbers will all be kind of conditional because we won't know 2 things. We won't know the final funding amount since it's based on a forecast, and that forecast will get updated before 2025. And we won't have the final tribal set aside. So it's more to show, I think, scale and impact. So you can see, oh, here's the impact of having these variables. Here's the impact of maintaining our current funding formula. And so it's more to be able to determine that direction than to nail down final numbers, because those will be subject to those 2 things that we don't know yet.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why I'm kind of reluctant to move this, because we want to see some numbers.
And that's what we're asking, really asking like you to do. And maybe we don't need a vote on that. It's just to say, like, tell us to come back and do more homework. That's fine too.
Yeah.
Hunter.
There's an emphasis on getting this RFGA out there and getting the process started, beating them to the next session, all those things. I'm just wondering, are we just going to have these 2 options like it was before, or what OHA brought today? In these next couple of weeks, can you, I don't know if y'all can do it, but if y'all had a different version that took in all the feedback from all these members of the OAC today, because there was a lot of feedback around the numbers and lots of those things, right? And so I think if we're only being presented with 2 options, and again, I know we got to hurry, but there was a lot of feedback today. And so, like, I think tweaking could be done. What could it look like? And I know you only have a certain amount of staff. That's just what I'm thinking. I didn't have much feedback during. I did a lot more listening. As we're talking about, like, are we going to vote on this now? It seems like there was a lot of feedback given. We're still only going to be presenting 2 options on the next OHA. So I'm just wondering what's going to go on with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think as I've had a little bit of time to think between our discussion and kind of other discussions and the votes, it sounds like to me, we might not even need to vote on a motion, because it sounds like OHA has more homework to do. And so maybe this motion is just completely irrelevant and I've been taking notes. This is obviously being recorded, but we have, I think, a lot of good feedback that we can incorporate and come back to in 2 weeks with more flushed out options that take into account this feedback, that kind of show you, and Shannon, looks like we actually don't need a vote to do that, show you what this impact would be. So it's a little bit more concrete. And maybe that's what we should do, because it sounds like there was a lot of good suggestions, and we have a little bit more homework to do on this. Sabrina?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so how many people, if we're not doing a vote, how many people would you like to agree with seeing some comparison numbers so we can have some options by the next meeting? Or are you just going to do your homework and just bring some options in the next meeting?
I think we can just do our homework and bring some options in the next meeting. I don't think it has to be a formal vote. I think the feedback that I heard anyways was pretty clear, that folks aren't comfortable voting on anything right now, and that's okay. But want more information, which is definitely valid, and you're all's right. So I'm fine with that.
Okay, and are we on a timeline? I just wanted to ask that. Are we on a timeline to get this information, or you'll let us know if we're starting to reach a number where we're crunching for time?
We are under a timeline. We have a little bit of time, but not a ton of time. So, I think we definitely have next week's meeting, or 2 weeks, a meeting that hopefully will give you all more information to either be able to make your decision or be close to making a decision. But if we are going to publish this application in July, our goal is to include also a sense of targets that people are applying for. I don't know if folks remember, but last time the application went out before we knew the county formulation. And that's in part what led to kind of that lengthy negotiation process, because people said, oh, we can apply for anything. And then we had, I'm making these numbers up, an ask of $10 million in a county whose allocation was only $5 million. So our goal this time around is say, okay, I know my county's allocation is about $5 million. So I'm not going to go and request 10, but I'll request something that's more in line with what my allocation is. Again, knowing that the numbers might change a little bit just based on the financial forecast and the final tribal set aside amount.
I have one last follow-up to that really quick. And so ideally, we need to make this decision next time when you come back with a couple of different numbers.
That would be ideal. I think July has 31 days in it. So if we need to, we could always have a special meeting in July to try to get it right, because we ultimately, we want you all to be comfortable with where we land. This is a big decision. It's an important decision, and it's one that only you can make. So I want this group to be comfortable with it. And if that means our timeline slips, that means our timeline slips. I don't think we should be rushing you all to a decision that doesn't feel right to you. So that is kind of my answer. I realize that's not a timeline answer, but I feel like that's how I feel, is that I want you all to be comfortable with the decision you make. So we will take that amount of time.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Thanks, Hubert. Is there any additional conversation or feedback that you want to make sure that we take back for our homework? Otherwise, happy to end this afternoon a little bit early.
So I want to ask one question. So that means that the application process is opening in July of 25 or this July?
But there were still the bad ones.
Our goal is to open the application process this July for grants to start in July 25.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah. Giving us plenty of time so that there isn't any gap in funding or delays getting this funding out. Because that's, I think, what everyone's shared goal is here. Well, I appreciate everyone's feedback. I think it was really good. It was super helpful, and we have plenty of homework to do. So I just really appreciate everyone's participation. If you do think of something that you wanted to make included, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Sydney. But in the meantime, I think we'll come back with some different options and be ready to present those to you in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. You guys have a good day.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
You too. Bye.